Surprisingly, writing's the hardest part, because you end up with, a lot of artists get into this thing to make pictures, and then you end up having to write all these words. And it's like, how did this happen? I thought I was getting out of that business, and now I'm in this business.
We're taking complex concepts or terms. We're talking about, health care, your health, crazy things that might be happening in the community, complex kinds of things, and trying to make them really simple and understandable, not dumbed down.
I see students a lot of times who come in and are thinking that writing is a kind of linear process where you come up with a topic, you research it, and then you write a paper, and then you immediately hit submit.
All of that requires some type of understanding of who you're writing for and the content that you're at. Like, I have to keep hold of what's my goal, what do I need out of it, and then what do I need for them to understand, and what do they need to understand for themselves so that all this can happen.
With the committee work, it's very interesting because I spend a lot of time carefully crafting emails to groups to reach group consensus on things about what we're going to do. I have people who I am the leader of the work that needs to get done for this group, but they don't work for me, they aren't beholden to me in any way. I'm not their boss. So I need to bring them along in a way that they can have a glad heart for the work that we're doing together.
Or responding to discovery requests and writing so that the other party would ask for certain documents from my client, and we would be producing them, but with the production we would be writing an explanation of where we searched for those documents, who had the documents, what method we used to retrieve them.
Okay, so the main reasons that I assign writing, first is because I think it's an opportunity for students to articulate their thinking in a way that maybe they aren't used to doing in mathematics.
But then I say you need to communicate things, you have to understand them. And one of the ways we turn all kinds of random, half-baked, possible ideas into something that can withstand scrutiny and hold up is by writing it for ourselves.
Our managers and skip level managers will want to know what happened, and they also need to be able to speak to it to maybe a leadership team and other meetings. And so the information is important to bubble up, and you have to, knowing your audience, not getting too much in the weeds technically, because it's very easy to do if you're a technical person, but the message gets lost because even though you may be technically correct in your communication, management is going to say, what is this? Are we going to burn up?
Well, the most important thing is to amuse the professor.
That is true.
I always assign questions that can't be answered. Because I think that creates the most interesting kind of essay.
They do a ton of writing because that's how we communicate back and forth about their assignments. That's the medium.
But we actually write. We have to communicate, and once you get past like a calculus class, almost all of the math that you do will look way more like writing than solving equations.
And this is kind of a wonky thing. Like, we're talking about how do we make this proposed legislation accessible to the public.
So a good economist can say to you, if you've never had an economics class in your life, could say, here's a 2-page paper describing this really complicated model, and you should be able to understand it completely, right? That's hard to do.
So it's a problem for me because I've been used to this environment where I can pretty much text whatever I want, say whatever I want, even on company email. Like, I used to work at a digital agency, and the rules are very different there. You can be much more loose with your communication, you can be flippant, you can joke around about things that maybe have a personal nature.
The writing is the place where students can really feel responsible for, or at least I hold them responsible for taking into account what has been done before.
It's heavy. I mean, you have to be really careful about how you phrase things, and you want to be specific enough that you satisfy the court requirements, that you have to satisfy or you get sanctioned. But you want to be general enough that you're not just offering up a lot of information that you aren't required to offer. Because the more it's like in legal proceedings, the more you talk or the more you write, the more you expose yourself
But the other reason for assigning writing is it's an authentic part of what it means to be a mathematician. So I think folks tend to think we just sort of like sit in our dark rooms scrawling equations on Blackboard.
So you actually need to communicate clearly and professionally, and a lot of people who are really good artists can't do that, and they stop getting opportunities because there's a lot of artists, and so if you can't figure out how to be professional, people who have to be professional to keep galleries open or museums, they just like, I don't have time to deal with sort of your eccentricity, weirdness.
Even how we place that information within the document is important, right? So we've got like a call-out box that says pharmaceutical stewardship, and we kind of explain it in that language.
If you're writing a paper of your own, you're making an argument, you have a thesis. A thesis should not only be the answer to a question, so there needs to be a question that's compelling. So the question has to have some significance. So what? Who cares?
And I often wonder about I should do a meta-analysis of myself, because I wouldn't care if it's on the discussion board, but if it's then printed out and handed to me, I think, even though I would want to not care, I probably would. Like, didn't you proofread this? What is,
Yeah.
So,
But the
expectations when I read the discussion board is so. I wanted
so
the
different.
content. I mean, it's
all content.
I use a lot of exclamation points and a lot of smiley faces or silly emojis because email is really challenging because you can come across really abrupt.
And so a good writer is somebody who can say, okay, here's my quantitative models. I need to write up the results in plain English so that my boss can understand it.
It depends on what it is. I mean, certain motions have never been written before if they're really creative, right? And so that's just starting from scratch. But there are kind of stock motions that I will send out an email and say to my colleagues, anyone else ever done a motion to strike based on this reason, And they will respond, oh yeah, I did it in the Harris case. Here's the document here. And
There are some cases where there are templates, where there's a kind of procedure, but I think for the most part it's a blank page. I mean, I start everything I write, it's open up a Word document, it's a blank sheet.
Then I'll take that and incorporate what they've said, change the facts, update the law if it needs to be updated, change the tone because my tone's different than my colleagues just because it's my style, right?
My own idea of what they should be able to accomplish. I think I used to, provide models of a linguistics journal article, and they would be, the goal would be to reproduce that, which is a very funny style for many of them. It follows scientific writing, AP.
In a test setting, I do also ask students to explain, and sometimes that's surprising for students. They expect that an exam is going to be solving some problems, and then this little explain piece can be easy to overlook, but to me that's actually my priority.
Because the scientists said, we can't think like historians. And the humanities people tend to think, well, we can't think like scientists. So I had them do a lab report, and I said, okay, identify hypothesis, and then list your evidence, then do an analysis of whether your evidence sustains or does not sustain your hypothesis, and write a conclusion. And then it was like a lab report. It was a ditto, right? Yeah, I love that. And then I said, all of you just wrote a paper.
Concepts. So we're thinking both about what can we explain with text, what do we need, schematics or simple visuals to help explain that text, and then how does all of that look in a document? All of those things together, it's one package.
If you're solving a really rich, interesting problem, that process of writing out your thinking, where you started, where you went, why you went the way you went.
And I can tell you, papers that I write, I will start with this kind of sketch of things and go down one direction. I'm like, I don't actually think that's the right direction. And I never would have come to that without kind of forcing myself to sit down and write it.
So it's not, I think it's probably not what students expect they'll be coming into, but it's authentic. That's what math is.